No mai, haere mai. Welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. My name is Nicola Batossi. I'm General Manager of Multiple Sclerosis Auckland. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, I'll just give you an overview of the format of the webinar. First, there will be a presentation of around 20 to 30 minutes. And following that, there'll be an opportunity for questions, which you can type into the chat box, and I will read them. We'll read them out. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, as you heard, and the recording will be available in the next couple of days via the MS Auckland website and Facebook page. So, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you tonight a person who wears many multiple sclerosis hats, including president of MSNZ, but tonight he is here in his capacity as trustee of the New Zealand Multiple Sclerosis Research Trust. So Neil Woodhams, thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving us this update on MS research from the Research Trust. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nicola. And if I can get the... Right. People see that? Nicola, you're able to see that? You're right?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity of talking to you tonight. The timing's quite good. I know I cancelled out earlier this month because of, or a few weeks ago because of sickness, but I've just come back from a meeting in Queenstown of about 80, mainly neurologists and MS nurses from all around the country, and getting an update on MS research from a wider perspective than perhaps I'm talking to you tonight. But now what I can't do is share my screen. Why is that not working? Nicola, I may need some help here.
Sure. Does the click-through work on your PowerPoint?
No. For some reason. It was working before when we started. Why is that? Can you, oh, there we are. So the structure of what I want to talk about today particularly is about the New Zealand Multiple Sclerosis Research Trust. And the reason for doing this is that this is really a trust that has been set up and is the instrument of people with MS and their families to influence both research that's being done in New Zealand, but also the employment of quality clinical staff with special interest in MS. So I intend to provide a little bit of background on its formation, its objectives, progress to date, some current research projects we've got, and a little bit about the future. So I've been involved now with MS since about 2003. And I've always been aware that people with MS and their families have an intense interest in MS research, and its webinars or meetings like this here and around the country have always attracted large numbers of people to come. And the trust is an attempt by them, i.e. carers like myself, people with MS, to have a major influence on MS research that's being done in New Zealand and services for people with MS. One of our concerns has often been that the MS research that has been done has often been done because researchers think it's a good idea rather than it being research that actually makes a difference for people with MS. Both MS New Zealand and MS Auckland over a period of time had accumulated bequests that had been specifically designated for MS research. And neither organisation really had the experience or the ability to manage that well. Although, to be fair, in 2006, MS New Zealand co-funded with the Health Research Council the 2006 MS New Zealand prevalence study, which is regarded internationally, interestingly, as one of the best prevalence studies that have ever been undertaken. And from that study has come a lot of work, both from an advocacy point of view, from MS New Zealand's point of view, but further research. And then in 2012, MS New Zealand funded the New Zealand Incidence Study, which looked at, tried to determine and follow through everybody who was diagnosed with MS in a 2-year period between 2012, 2014, and follow them for the next 5 years to see what happened to them in terms of their development. And while there has been some initial results published, there is still more work coming from that study. So in 2015, I led a group of people who decided finally to put this into a more formal structure, and the trust was set up. And it was set up with an advance from MS New Zealand of $600,000, and an advance from MS Auckland of $300,000, which was the bequest money that had built up. And since that time, MS New Zealand has contributed a further $150,000. People with MS and their families recognise, I think, that if we wait for government or other funders to meet our needs, we'll wait a long time. And so this is an opportunity for us to make a difference. The trust currently has been successful in raising further funds, and its funds that it has invested have performed well. And we currently have over $300,000 of uncommitted funding for MS research and clinician development. So the objectives of the trust when we set it up was to stimulate and coordinate MS research in New Zealand, to collaborate with other research organisations on MS research, and that I emphasise the collaboration. We're not doing necessarily this alone, but we have relationships with a number of other research organisations and look to co-fund where appropriate, to share research information with MS New Zealand and regional societies and with people with MS. And this is a major task. At Queenstown, Dr. Ernie Willoughby gave a presentation on recent MS research, and last year alone there were 7,953 articles in recognised medical journals published on MS research. The next point from my point of view is really the key. It's to create a research environment which attracts and retains high quality health professionals in New Zealand. I know from my experience working within the health sector that senior doctors in particular, but also senior nurses, not only want to treat patients, but they also want to participate in research. And we see having the funding available to enable them to do that, hopefully will attract and retain high quality MS professionals in New Zealand. And finally, we have a role in advocating to the government to encourage MS research in New Zealand. The trustees, we have a board of 7 trustees, and we're currently advertising for 2 additional trustees. So if there is people on this webinar that think they're qualified and interested, please get in touch. Kate Russell has an extensive experience in not-for-profits and in medical research, is an independent chair. Myself, Jan Campbell, who's a MS New Zealand executive committee member and a registered nurse, and a former senior executive with Roche. Peter Wood will be known to many of you, who's the treasurer for MS Auckland and the MS Auckland nominee. And then 3 doctors, Dr. Ernest Willoughby, who will be known to many of you. Ernie is really the doyen of MS clinicians in New Zealand, although he's now retired, but has an international reputation and leads the clinical aspects of the decision-making of the board. Dr. Elsa Cloty, who's a gynecologist and obstetrician in Canterbury and a person with MS, and Dr. Brian Linehan, who's a retired pathologist and a person with MS. So we have a good mix of clinical, business, and not-for-profit experience amongst the trustees. So if you look at the first objective that I talked about, stimulating and coordinating MS research in New Zealand, one of our first projects was to try and introduce MS BASE into New Zealand. And if you haven't looked at the MS BASE website, I've given you a reference there. It's well worthwhile looking at. MS BASE is a MS-specific database based in Melbourne. Some of you will remember we brought out Dr. Helmut Butz-Koven. He chairs the trust. And it's a home for anonymized patient data of MS patients from 41 countries around the world. 891 MS researchers and clinicians are principal investigators, and there are 83,721, in fact, patient records in the database. It consists of 2 parts. Firstly, IMED, which is a front-end individual patient record for patient management by their neurologist, and then a back end where that information is anonymized and is transferred into the database. And the importance of this is that approved MS researchers can go in and access a much wider number of people with MS than they would if they concentrated on their own patients. And as an example, I was in Sydney at a research conference a couple of years ago talking to a MS neurologist from Queensland who had just done or just presented a paper on pregnancy and MS, an important topic obviously for young women with MS. And she said, Neil, if I had relied on my own patient database, I would have been able to look at the records of only 35 patients of the age that were and who had been pregnant with MS. By going into MS BASE, I was able to look at the records of 1,400. And so you can see the other thing that this database, most clinical trials are for relatively short periods, perhaps up to 2 years. MS BASE provides the ability to go in and look at the impacts, for example, of a drug over a 10 or a 15-year period. Just going back to that, currently we have the IMED software installed in both Waikato and Canterbury, and Waikato have transferred their data into MS BASE. Our activity in this area, while we've tried extremely hard to get it involved in Auckland and elsewhere, the current staffing shortages within the health sector at the present time and the new and latest health reforms have meant that it's been much slower in introducing into New Zealand than we'd want, but we have money to do it. I initiated discussions with a couple of areas over the weekend, and I'm hopeful we'll make better progress in the next 12 months. We're the sponsor of the researcher from Wellington who's undertaking a survey of people with MS who've gone overseas for stem cell treatment. And one of the things about people going overseas for stem cell treatment, they tend to get lost to us, and we have little idea of, one, in fact, how many have gone, and two, what the long-term results have been. And so this survey is being conducted under the auspices of the Neurology Department in Wellington. And if any of you in the audience have, in fact, been overseas for stem cell treatment and haven't completed the survey, the reference is there, and we'd be very grateful for you to do that. And this, of course, links very closely with MSNZ's advocacy for stem cell treatment to be available in New Zealand. And we've been working very hard with Joan Perry from Auckland, who presented a petition to Parliament a couple of weeks ago with 10,000 signatures, and many of you will have signed that petition. I'm really delighted to say that over the weekend it was announced that we're close to doing, the first New Zealand patient is close to having stem cell treatment available and in New Zealand, and that will happen, I understand, within the next couple of months. The next, we have funded a young New Zealand neurologist, Dr. Zoe Dyer, who's undertaking work on stem cells at St Vincent's in Sydney, which is the HSCT centre in Australia. I'm not a clinician, and I'm not going to try and describe to you what she's doing, but I'm pleased to say that she is part of our winter webinar series, and so if you're interested, you can enroll for that. We have two other current projects at the Centre for Brain Research at Auckland University underway. One is looking at a drug that is already approved for treating pain in cancer to treat neuropathic pain in MS, and that's being conducted by Associate Professor Jack Flanagan. And Dr. Amy McCoey-Chapman, who's looking at generating these strange cells from human skin for the treatment of multiple sclerosis stage 1. And Amy is also speaking in our winter series. The issue being, or the research being, that Auckland, the Centre for Brain Research, have developed a method for producing oligodendrocytes from human skin, which is a world first, and it means that it cuts down the time that the research they're undertaking considerably, from a matter of days or weeks compared with months. And the first stage has been completed, and Amy will be reporting on that. As I said before, from our point of view, we realized that we're a relatively small fish in this ocean, and that it was really important that we developed working relationships with a number of New Zealand and Australian-based research organisations. This has really been the foundation right from the time that we did the prevalence study, where we went to the Health Research Council. We put up, I think it was $200,000. They put up $200,000. They managed the project, which is half the thing in research, is having good processes around it, and we produced a great result. And so we've developed relationships with the Neurological Foundation, the Centre for Brain Research, the Liggins Institute, the Brain Research Institute in Christchurch, the Auckland School of Medicine, the Otago School of Medicine, and most importantly, MS Australia. And those of you that have seen what MS Australia does, they really are one of the leading MS research funders in the world, quite frankly. I think this year they're planning to spend about $13 million on MS research. Another objective that I talked about earlier on was sharing research information. And what we try and do with our website is to ensure that the research that we put up there has been vetted for a New Zealand context and is relevant. And we also run annual research webinars, and I'll provide the details of this year's in a minute. In 2018, we sponsored 2 internationally known MS researchers to come to New Zealand to the Global Burden of Neurological Disease Conference that was held and sponsored by AUT. The important thing to come out of that is that by 2040, neurological disease will be the largest cause of death in the world, overtaking such things as respiratory disease or cancer or coronary disease also. And this is going to provide a huge challenge to neurological services where we're already significantly understaffed. In the past, we've hosted a number of interesting webinars, and they're all listed there. And they're all available on the New Zealand MS Research website. But you'll see the topics, MS and pregnancy, progression in MS, one of those key things, which for many, many years, progressive MS has been to some extent ignored, and certainly there haven't been drugs for it. Now an enormous amount of work going in internationally on that. And that webinar covered some of that. Obviously, in the last couple of years, COVID and the impact of COVID on MS, does COVID stimulate relapses, for example? Advances in AHSCT clearly has always been a topic of significant interest. And then exploring how lifestyle modifications can improve outcomes. And MS Research Australia did a whole lot of work last year, and this was published, and Julia Morahan, who's their Director of Research, spoke on that. I'm now pleased to announce the 3 webinars for this year. The first one being celebrating New Zealand researchers. And we've got Dr. Kimberly Pittman, who's working in Tasmania on identifying genes and proteins that are important in the function of brain cells that are affected by multiple sclerosis. And Dr. Amy McCoey-Chapman, who is looking at generating oligodendrocytes from human skin for the treatment of MS. So that's the first one, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. The next one is on Epstein-Barr virus, the hot topic. Here we've gone to Dr. Mitch Wallen, who I was talking about before, came out in 2018. Mitch holds an interesting role. He's the director of the Veterans Administration on the East Coast of the United States. And within the Veterans Administration, I think he's responsible for something like 14,000 veterans with MS. And of course, being Army veterans or service veterans, 75% of them are men, as opposed to the normal 75% women, 25% men. He also led the prevalence study, which for the first time established the number of people in the United States with MS. But the recent research that appears to link Epstein-Barr virus with MS was conducted in analysing a huge number of people with MS that were either in the service or veterans, and Mitch has been involved in that research. And then an Australian researcher, Dr. Corey Smith, who's focusing his work on understanding T-cell mediated control of viral infections in humans, including Epstein-Barr, and the development of novel theories. So that should be a cracker too. And finally, moving away possibly from the straight clinical side, into looking after our bodies inside and out. And Julie Davey, a well-known neurophysiotherapist who I know has spoken at MS Auckland events in the past. And she is going to do a review of recent research into MS and exercise and the role that exercise plays in managing MS. And that will be motivation for all of us, I think, to get up and do some more exercise. And Dr. Wolfgang Marx, who's looking at the axis between diet, mood, and the gut, microbiome in people with MS. And there's been a lot of work done in terms of what influence, if any, the gut microbiome might have in terms of targeting interventions for fatigue, depression, and MS progression. I said before, one of the motivations that we've had in setting up the trust and doing the work we do is to create an environment which attracts and retains high quality health professionals to work in New Zealand. In New Zealand in 2016, there was a paper presented in the New Zealand Medical Journal which showed that New Zealand had about 1/3 of the one-third of the neurologists that Australia had. There's a severe shortage in New Zealand, and there's an even severer shortage of neurologists who specialise in MS. And if you think access in Auckland is poor, if you live in a place like Taranaki, it's virtually impossible. One of the key things that we're keen on is that our neurological departments have the capacity to participate in clinical trials. And for example, the Auckland Neurology Department participated in the first trials for Tysabri, which today is still regarded as one of the most effective disease-modifying treatments. But that drug was available to some people on trial long before it was approved by Pharmac and available generally. The same with ocrelizumab. The sponsors of this webinar, Roche, made ocrelizumab available for 20 people in New Zealand with progressive MS, and with some very interesting results and positive results for the people that are on that trial. But to do trials, you need to have not only doctors, but you also need to have the appropriately trained nurses. And so from our point of view, if we can provide funding for those doctors and nurses to undertake research like this, then we're making a contribution, a useful contribution. Earlier this year, Dr. Willoughby rang me one Sunday lunch, and said, I've been talking to a colleague of mine, and he chairs a trust, and there might be some money that's available for MS for training young doctors and nurses. And between sort of midday Saturday and 9 o'clock on Monday morning, we put together a proposal which we thought might get us $100,000. When the trust rang us on the Wednesday night, the chairman told me that they had decided to give us $150,000, which I thought was pretty good. And then he went on to say a year for 3 years. So the trust has a fund and guaranteed funding for the next 3 years for the training, particularly for sending young doctors and nurses overseas to specialise in MS. And one of the subjects at the conference in Queenstown on Saturday was, in fact, to talk to the neurologist about the opportunities. And the funding that we have made available to Dr. Zoe Dyer that I talked about earlier has come from this fund. So we're already investing. Now, this is a long-term, don't expect suddenly there are going to be 3 more MS neurologists in Auckland next year. This is a long-term involvement, and I wouldn't expect us to see significant increases in the numbers of these specialists as a result of this spending for maybe 3 to 5 years. But you've got to make a start somewhere, and that's the start we're making. And one of the other things, because we control the funding, there's a certain amount of flexibility, and we do have considerable discretion as to how that funding might be spent. And so we've put the word out amongst the neurological community, stressing that it's not just doctors, but it's also nurses who want to upskill, that we're open for business. And hopefully we will see further progress in the months to come. Finally, we've had an objective of advocating to the government to encourage MS research in New Zealand. And we're members of New Zealanders for Health Research, which is run out of AUT, which has put together a very cogent argument for advocating for increasing government spending in health research. Currently, we spend about 0.76% of our gross domestic product, $140 million on health research. And we are advocating that that be increased to 2.46%, and that's about 3 times as much, 420 million, be spent. We haven't got there yet, but this is an area where if the Research Trust was advocating purely on its own, we probably wouldn't get a lot of traction. But by advocating through this organisation, we have all of the universities involved. We have a number of other trusts and like the Mulligan Institute involved. So the voice is quite important. We have had one win in that when the new health reforms came out, the original bill setting up made no mention of health research, and the bill has in fact been altered before it was passed as an act, and health research is now a fundamental responsibility of Health New Zealand. So that's a major achievement. So in conclusion, the trusts are developing story. I stress it's part of a long-term solution to improve access to specialist MS nurses and doctors in New Zealand. It represents a serious commitment by people with MS and their families to control their own destiny and find solutions. As I say, if we sit back and expect the government is going to do it, it's not going to happen. We fund our work by way of donations and bequests, and your support is welcome. And further details are available on the MS New Zealand Research website, which is there. So that's my presentation. If there are questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Thank you, Neil. It was a really informative presentation. I'll just wait to see if anybody has any questions for the chat box.
Looks like they're all silent, Nicola.
Yes, you must have been very thorough. There's no questions. Somebody's raised their hand. Somebody has asked, would the Trust support an occupational therapist to upskill in MS? Absolutely.
From my point of view, one of the important things, and doesn't happen in New Zealand, MS should be treated by multidisciplinary teams, in my view, and that's the neurologist, the MS nurse, the physiotherapist, the occupational therapist, and the psychiatrist. And anything that we can do to assist that, by all means.
Thanks for that question, Jane. Are there any other questions? Would the Trust be able to fund extra nurses in Auckland?
I don't want to say too much about that, but yes, the simple answer is where there's a will, there's a way. MS Auckland actually in 2014 made an offer to the Auckland District Health Board to fund an additional nurse for a period of time. It was when the Pharmac changed their criteria for access to drugs and approved the four new drugs, and we made the offer, which was never accepted. I don't want to say too much about it, but it is on our agenda. And under certain circumstances, yes, we would look to. We certainly have made the offer to all of the neurology departments to fund the entering of all patient data into MS Base. And we've done that both in Canterbury and in Waikato. But as I say, the money that we have is flexible, and we are open to approaches.
There are a couple of additional questions that have come through. Can you please elaborate on the first MS patient that is going to have HSCT in a couple of months in New Zealand?
No, I know nothing more than that, other than that I understand it's going to happen. It will happen within the pretty strict criteria that the New Zealand neurologists and hematologists have agreed, and which follow closely the criteria for access in Australia. So that's all I know at this stage, but I do understand that's happening.
Any more information on the Ocrevus bioinjection trial?
Nicola, you may be able to answer that, because I think it's happening in Auckland. I'm right in saying we're not involved in it, but the details of that I think are on the MS Auckland website.
They're still looking for participants. Yeah, so it's ongoing. Does the grant to doctors and nurses have any conditions attached, like they must return to New Zealand for a specified time?
We haven't imposed a situation where they have to come back at this stage. No. Not saying that we mightn't in the future, but we haven't at this stage.
And one final question: any agenda for the Waikato area?
Well, as I said before, Waikato is the only centre which is fully operating on MS Base, and I caught up with both the MS nurse and the neurologist in Queenstown, and I've arranged to go down and see them. So nothing specifically for Waikato at this stage.
There is one more question. Really concerned that people with primary progressive MS are not offered any medication. Is this likely to change?
I mentioned earlier on that it's an area that you know, there's not a lot that I'm aware of at this stage happening, other than it's interesting, and I'm probably going to get criticised by clinicians here. I went to the ECTRIMS conference in Stockholm in 2019, and there were about 9,000 MS researchers there. And I listened as a interested layperson for 3 days and caught up with Dr. Wallace Brownlee, who some of you will know, but was a brilliant young New Zealand neurologist working in London. And I said to him, I said, Wallace, it seems to me that people here are treating MS as a disease in which there are various phases, but don't specifically look at it as being primary progressive or relapsing, remitting, or secondary progressive. And he said, well, Neil, he said, that's how I look at it. But obviously many neurologists don't and try and put people into pigeonholes. But I mean, for example, you now can, under the pharmac criteria, get MS drugs after one relapse, after one attack, so long as it's been diagnosed as MS. Now, at that stage, whether it's primary progressive, relapsing, remitting, is probably a moot point. So there are drugs available at that stage, but no, there's not a lot more that I'm aware of, but I'm sure there will be. I'm sure if there's 7,953 published papers last year, there'll be one in there somewhere on primary progressive.
Thanks, Neil. And just to note that our next webinar will be during MS Awareness Week on Tuesday, the 13th of September. And Jennifer Pereira will be speaking about the research linking MS and the Epstein-Barr virus. So it looks like that's all our questions for this evening.
There's Roland Matthews coming in down there, I see.
Okay, there is one. I have just published a book on HSCT. It covers my entire journey of a treatment that I am certain saved my life. From my following of the New Zealand criteria, I think it is far too prohibitive in comparison to other countries. Are you going to petition the government to fast track the treatment for more people with all forms of MS? Well,
firstly, hi, Roland. We have a petition which is being considered by the Petitions Committee on the 26th of August, which has been signed by 10,000 people. And from my point of view, I spent a good deal of yesterday working on the submission. So we will be talking. I think one of the things from my experiences is that, you know, the criteria are very restrictive at this stage. It is inevitable over time that they will relax those criteria. I mean, for example, there's a maximum age of 50. If they get a very good candidate who's 52 or 53, it'll be extremely hard for them to say no. But I take your point.
All right, that looks like all of the questions. So Neil Woodhams, thank you so much for joining us tonight on behalf of the New Zealand MS Research Trust to give us that really informative update.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
All right, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining tonight and for posting such great questions. Have a lovely evening. Goodbye.